of the humanitarian crisis in Texas. The good news? Power's been restored to most of the state. The number of households without electricity is down from 4 million to around 100,000. But there's a new danger putting Texans at risk. Millions are now confronting a water crisis. 13 million Texans don't have safe drinking water due to cracked pipes, frozen wells, and water treatment plants that have been knocked offline. The people of Texas are suffering because of decades of Republican intransigence. Republicans refuse to take action to weatherize water systems from the cold, and the Texas Tribune reports Texas officials knew winter storms could leave the state's power grid vulnerable, but they left the choice to prepare for harsh weather up to the power companies, many of which opted against the costly upgrades. Texas Republicans are to blame for these failures, let's be clear. And Democrats are now working to right these wrongs, starting at the top. On February 14th, the first day of the power outages in Texas, President Biden signed an emergency declaration that authorized FEMA to provide the state with critical equipment like generators and resources such as water and diesel fuel. President Biden spoke with the governor of Texas last night, and today, at the governor's request, announced that he'll be signing a major disaster declaration that'll provide even more relief to the state.
As I said when I ran, I'm going to be a president for all America. All red, there's no red or blue. It's all about commitment that the American people make to one another. And so we're going to sign that declaration once it's in front of me, and God willing, it will bring a lot of relief to a lot of Texans.
On the local level, the White House has consulted with 17 mayors and 5 county judges around the state to ensure their areas are getting FEMA resources. You might have forgotten what it looks like, but that's leadership. Leadership isn't tossing paper towels into a crowded church in Puerto Rico in the wake of Hurricane Maria. Leadership is listening to people. It's hearing people's needs and then helping address those needs. President Biden said that he'll be making a trip to Texas next week, but only when he hears from the people on the ground that his visit won't take away from relief efforts. Because he's not going for a photo op. He's going because he's a leader. This week has left Texans angered and looking to their local officials for answers, but many of those leaders refuse to step up or even to tell the truth. Republican Governor Greg Abbott, who's already been under fire for his handling of the coronavirus pandemic, is blaming the crisis on electrical grid operators and get this, the Green New Deal, a proposal that's never passed Congress. Republican Senator Ted Cruz had a frigid home without electricity this week, like millions of his constituents. But instead of using his position to help fellow Texans, Senator Cruz hopped a plane to Cancun and then lied about the trip when he was called out on it. Even his fellow Republican Senator John Cornyn isn't that bad. And Cornyn isn't usually at the top of the list of officials deserving praise, but he worked with the Energy Department to allow federal rules to be set aside during emergency conditions, giving Texans more leeway to recover. Our first guest is leading where others won't. Democratic Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher, who represents parts of Houston, says Texas is facing an all-hands-on-deck situation. Today, Congresswoman Fletcher, along with 4 other House Democrats, wrote a letter to Governor Abbott demanding answers for why the state didn't take steps to prevent crises like this from happening after a report in 2011, 10 years ago, raised alarms about the ability of Texas infrastructure to handle winter weather. The letter says, quote, "The events of this week demonstrate that there are significant shortcomings in preparations and more must be done to protect communities disproportionately impacted by winter power outages. We're concerned that the underlying issues that contributed to the 2011 massive power failure have not been fully addressed." Texans deserve answers. They deserve leaders who lead, and they deserve leaders who tell the truth. Some Texas leaders used to know that, like former Governor Ann Richards.
We're not going to have the America that we want until we elect leaders who are going to tell the truth. Not most days, but every day. Leaders who don't forget what they don't want to remember.
And leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congresswoman Lizzie Fletcher of Texas. She's a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Congresswoman Fletcher, thank you very much for coming on the show tonight. You know, the letter that you sent to Governor Abbott asking him for answers about the 2011 power failures reminded me that the 2011 power failures, that wasn't the first time Texas was hit by a massive power failure. The first time was in 1989. Now that you're a member of Congress, and from Texas, how surprised are you that your state has had two opportunities to get it right and has failed both times?
Well, Jonathan, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for having me on to talk about these issues. And I really appreciated that you started this conversation with the wonderful clip of our former governor, Ann Richards, who was the governor when I was growing up here. And I'm sorry to say that, you know, I'm sad but not surprised that we have failed to respond to these challenges, some clearly identified problems. I think what we're seeing now is a massive failure of our system, and it's both the grid and ERCOT, the Public Utility Commission, but also our elected leaders in state government. The governor, the legislature oversee this system, and ultimately it's a complex system, but we're not getting the oversight that we should, and we're not having the leadership to make sure that Texans have what they need, really the bare minimum, heat in their homes and the lights on the coldest day in years across the state of Texas. So, you know, I am hopeful because we have incredible leaders in our local community here in Houston, Mayor Turner, Judge Hidalgo, the mayors of lots of smaller towns and villages that I've been on the phone with this week. We've got a lot of leaders here in Texas, but unfortunately, we're not seeing the leadership in Austin that we need.
And to that point about the leadership that you want, if you were to get the leadership that you want, what are the three things that you would ask a governor with his ears open to have that person do to bring relief to the people of Texas right now?
Well, right now, as you mentioned, we have an unfolding crisis. I do hope that much of the power crisis is behind us, but we have a water crisis right now, and there are cascading effects from that. I am one of those 13 million Texans that has a boil water notice that can't take a shower or do, you know, the dishes without boiling the water. And so it's really critical for us to address the water crisis as quickly as possible. But that also means, as we have frozen roads and other challenges, that people are going to the stores and there's not enough food on some of the shelves. People are hungry. People are thirsty. We need to deal with that immediate humanitarian crisis that's unfolding. The next thing we're going to see as things start to thaw here is broken pipes everywhere. And I'm hearing from my constituents. My husband and I helped our neighbor across the street who found a leak in her house yesterday. We helped her cut off the water at the street. And that's happening all over Houston. It's happening all over the state of Texas. So we're going to need a lot of help dealing with those, the infrastructure issues, both in people's homes and in our public infrastructure that's going to result from this freeze. And so those are some of the immediate things we have to do. But we also have to look long term at how we make sure this does not happen again. And that was the purpose of my letter with my colleagues on the Energy and Commerce Committee. We very much need to understand exactly what happened, why it happened, and how we make sure it never happens again.
Congresswoman, this has been happening since Sunday. You are an elected official. Did you feel that it was your personal responsibility to jump in and pitch in where you could be helpful without a moment's second thought?
Absolutely. And, you know, unfortunately, our community is no stranger to disasters. We've had several recent events. And I think that the lesson that I have learned from that is that everybody just needs to show up. This was actually something I talked about a lot after Hurricane Harvey, because I think so many of us, when that happened, who were relatively lucky, who didn't have flooded homes, wanted to help. And we kind of didn't know where to go sometimes. Where were we the most needed? And the lesson from Harvey that I took away was just show up. Where there are people in need, where there are things that need to be done. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to know exactly what to do. You just show up and be there and be a helping hand. And so certainly now that I am a member of Congress, I see that I have many things that I can do. And I've been on the phone this week with the Speaker of the House. My team's been in touch with the White House. We've talked to FEMA. We've talked to the Division of Emergency Management here in Texas, really trying to make sure that the needs of our community and the needs statewide are being met. So there are certain things I can do, but today I was passing out water with volunteers because it is an all hands on deck situation, and we need everybody to play a part. And there's something everybody can do.
And there's a reason why I asked that what might have sounded like a leading, simple-minded question, and that is, I'm just wondering, what did it mean to you and to Texans that one of its senators, instead of doing what you did, handing out water, being on the ground and being helpful, left the state, left the country, left Texans to fend for themselves?
Well, Jonathan, it's certainly not the decision that I made or would have made. And I don't think it's the decision that most of our local leaders here in our community are making. I mean, when I've been on the phone with mayors, one of the mayors who's in my congressional district owns a brewery, and he was boiling water and handing it out to the citizens in his town. I talked to another city council member today who was handing out water bottles himself, going from house to house for folks who had special needs. So that's what we expect of our leaders here in Texas, certainly here in Houston, where we pride ourselves on taking care of each other. So I think that, the decision that we expect here and that we deserve here is the one we've seen reflected in the vast majority of our local leaders here in Houston.
Congressman Lizzie Fletcher of Texas, thank you very much for coming to The Last Word.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. So glad to be with you.
And good luck down there. Coming up, food banks in Texas have gone into disaster mode. They're ramping up operations to tackle a surge in hunger after the unprecedented freezing conditions disrupted almost every part of Texas is beginning to come into focus. At least 30 people have died in the state, including a 60-year-old man who froze to death in his living room. Authorities say it felt like the same temperature as the air outside. An 11-year-old boy was found dead by his mother in their unheated mobile home. Authorities suspect hypothermia. Other Texans have died from carbon monoxide poisoning just trying to keep warm. And many fear the worst is still ahead. Local officials don't know when millions of Texans will regain access to clean drinking water. Residents have waited hours in long lines at water distribution sites.
We've been hunting. We've gone different places looking for it and can't find it.
It's pretty tough to find bottled water. We are having to boil, to wash dishes or do anything.
There's also a food crisis in Texas. Many grocery stores have closed due to lack of power, and those that have remained open have little food to spare. The food shortage is also impacting food banks. At least 8 food banks have asked the state for extra help feeding residents, according to the CEO of Feeding Texas. And the pain of this crisis, like the pandemic, is disproportionately affecting Black and Hispanic communities.
I'm trying so hard not to cry because we have to pay the stuff to be able to survive, Pay light, pay rent, pay the car. I'm very stressed too with everything going on. It's hard, but I'm trying.
Joining us now is Democratic State Representative Chris Turner, who represents Grand Prairie, Texas. He's the chair of the Texas House Democratic Caucus. And also joining us, Eric Cooper, president and CEO of the San Antonio Food Bank. Thank you both very much for being here. It is a dire situation there in Texas. Mr. Cooper, let me start with you. From your vantage point, please tell the audience exactly how dire the situation is right now.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. At the onset of COVID-19 here in San Antonio, we went from feeding 60,000 people a week to 120,000 people a week. And in this storm, it's been paralyzing and really the inability for us to move. Roads were unsafe. And so we knew there's this huge demand, but it was a struggle to get the families the food that they desperately needed. So we really pivoted to meals. Many of these households lost power, so they couldn't prepare the groceries we were planning on delivering. They lost water. And so as the temperature has risen yesterday, today, we've been able to put together the distributions. Today alone, we fed 24,000 people, all desperate for groceries because they've tried to seek groceries at the grocery stores. And as was mentioned, they're sold out. They just don't have the inventory. Everybody needs water. And so water has been a huge demand item. And we're just doing the best we can to make sure families get this basic need taken care of.
You know, Representative Turner, from your vantage point as a member of the Texas State Legislature, what are you hearing from your constituents, and what can you do to help them when it comes to getting access to food and water?
Well, John, thank you for having me. And you know, I'm so inspired listening to Mr. Cooper to talk about the incredible work that he and his team are doing in San Antonio. And I'm seeing that play out across North Texas as well. Just good people working hard to help their fellow Texans who are in a dire situation right now. As for myself, my staff and I have spent all week working to help our constituents with basic necessities of life. Getting electric power turned back on in their homes, getting natural gas service restored in their homes. Because one of the things we discovered a couple of days ago is, yes, a lot of people were without electricity, but the natural gas system had taken a real hit. So some people got their power back on, but their heaters that are powered by natural gas wouldn't turn on. So their houses were still 40, 45 degrees inside or colder. And so we've been working to solve those problems house by house, constituent by constituent. And yes, we have, I also represent the city of Arlington, which is under a boil order because the water pressure dropped to a dangerous level a couple days ago. They hope that by Sunday, the water will be safe to drink again. But my constituents in Arlington are facing the exact same situation as 14 million other Texans are right now.
You know, Representative Turner, the Texas Tribune had an article yesterday with the headline, "Texas was seconds and minutes away from catastrophic months-long blackouts," officials say. And it says, Texas power grid was seconds, minutes away from catastrophic failure that could have left Texans in the dark for months. If operators had not acted in that moment, the state could have suffered blackouts that could have occurred for months and left Texas in an indeterminately long crisis. That's pretty startling, but I'm just wondering, is Texas out of the woods yet? Just given the fact that we know that the last big cold snap in 2011 led to recommendations that weren't followed.
Well, you're absolutely right. And so I would say we're out of the woods this week because the temperatures are warming up now, and we'll be above freezing tomorrow and stay above freezing tomorrow, at least here in North Texas. And but we fully expect and know that we will have severe weather again in the future. Maybe it's not this year, but it could be next year. It could be the year after. And that's the nature of weather, particularly in this time of changing climate where we have more and more extreme weather events. So Texas has to do a better job of being prepared. And you're right, in 2011, that was a catastrophic storm, not as bad as this one, but we should have at that time required power generators to weatherize their equipment so this type of thing wouldn't happen. And it was left to be completely voluntary, and that's one of the reasons we're in the mess that we're in this week.
Mm-hmm. You know, Mr. Cooper, there was a story in the Texas Tribune on Wednesday about how the Texans running out of food as weather crisis disrupts the supply chain. And as I was listening to you, I thought of this article because, you know, once things get back up to the point where you are able to get enough food again and enough water again to Texans, the fact that the food supply chain has been disrupted, where livestock growers are running out of feed. How long do you think the food disruptions in particular will last once the power is back on, once the water is back on?
It's going to be a very long-term recovery for Texas agriculture. I mean, I talked to some dairy farmers that were dumping milk because they couldn't get trucks there to pick it up. Cattlemen couldn't feed their cattle because they couldn't get feed in. And the Texas produce across the winter garden, this freeze is going to damage so much of that crop yield. And so it's going to increase costs, place a lot of produce items maybe out of reach for the families we serve. It will mean less donations, less support that we might typically get, but it will start to come back. It's just going to take time, and I think bridging the gap from today to that time is what Texas food banks are trying to do. And the disparity for families, I mean, many of the families that came through the line today, a husband and wife, they had tested positive for COVID. They were trying to stay quarantined, keep their kids from getting the coronavirus, and their lights went out. Their water stopped. Their house was freezing. Their kids were trying to get in bed with them to stay warm. These are desperate circumstances for families, and we're doing all we can, and our community is trying to support us, but more needs to be done.
Wow, Texas State Representative Chris Turner and Eric Cooper, thank you very much. America is with you and praying for you. Good luck.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thanks for
Coming up, Republicans are trying desperately to stop President Biden's COVID relief legislation, but they're facing one big problem. It's really, really popular, even with other Republicans. That's next. Democrats are closer than ever to getting much-needed relief into the hands of Americans. Today, House Democrats unveiled the 591-page text of President Biden's coronavirus aid package. The House Budget Committee is set to take up the legislation on Monday, and the bill's expected to come to the House floor for a vote late next week. President Biden called out Republican critics of the package this afternoon.
Let me ask them, what would they have me cut? What would they have me leave out? Should we not invest $20 billion to vaccinate the nation? Should we not invest $290 million to extend unemployment insurance for the 11 million Americans who are unemployed so they can get by? This is the United States of America, for God's sake. We invest in people who are in need. Do we not invest $35 billion to help people keep a roof over their heads? I could go on, but you get the point.
For all the obvious GOP criticism, Republicans are actually struggling to derail the president's relief plan because it's so popular. The New York Times reports many of its core provisions poll strongly, even with Republicans. More than 7 in 10 Americans now back Mr. Biden's aid package, according to new polling from the online research firm SurveyMonkey for the New York Times. That includes support from 3/4 of independent voters, 2 in 5 Republicans, and nearly all Democrats. Joining us now are Renee Graham, opinion columnist and associate editor at the Boston Globe, and Yamiche Alcindor, White House correspondent for the PBS NewsHour and an MSNBC political analyst. Thank you both for being here. Yamiche, I'll start with you. In that clip that we saw of President Biden, I mean, he was pretty forceful there in taking it to Republicans about, well, what would you have me cut? But even still, even though the bill is popular, how much support is President Biden's plan getting up there on the Hill?
Well, what we saw was President Biden getting angry and really using this forceful tone to fight for what he believes is urgent need for the American people, and American people that are dying at higher rates, that are getting evicted from their homes. This is, of course, this is really underscoring all of the things that President Biden is saying he wants to do. And when you look at the Hill, this is really still very much a Democratic-backed bill. From the very beginning, though, of course, President Biden was talking about unity, he also was backing this process for reconciliation, which allows Democrats to pass this bill with no Republican votes. And the White House is really doing this thing where they're trying to redefine what bipartisanship is. Of course, traditionally, it's about whether or not Republicans in Capitol Hill, whether or not they vote for the bill. But they're saying that because this has backing from Republican voters, as well as Republican local officials, mayors, and governors who are in desperate need for help, they're saying we still feel comfortable calling this a bipartisan bill. So we're likely going to see a bill that has very little, if any, Republican support, but that might have Republican support outside of Washington, D.C.
And, you know, Renee, that makes me wonder, does it even matter? Or does it even matter to voters if this bill passes without any Republican votes? Will voters even care?
I don't think they're going to care at all, Jonathan. I think what they're concerned about is getting help. You know, you're talking about people who've been struggling in this country for almost a solid year. And people aren't going to care if, you know, who crosses the aisle and who does what and who. They just want the bill to pass. They just want to get the relief that they really need. And I think what was good about what President Biden did today was he was almost kind of shaming the Republicans and saying, well, are you going to take away people's homes? Are you going to keep them hungry? He's laying this on them. You know, and he's saying, look, we have this bill to help the American people, and the GOP is not interested in doing that. And I think that's a really important point to make. So I think that not only do the people not care if this is a bipartisan bill, but they'll be able to look at why it wasn't a bipartisan bill and who stood against getting aid to the American people.
You know, the clip that we showed of President Biden there in Michigan being real fiery about his COVID relief bill. That wasn't the only speech he gave today. He spoke to the Munich Security Conference, which he went to all the time when he was a member of the Senate and chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Have a listen to what he had to say to our allies over in Europe.
And I'm sending a clear message to the world. America is back. The transatlantic alliance is back. And we are not looking backward. We are looking forward together. Democracy doesn't happen by accident. We have to defend it, fight for it, strengthen it, renew it. We have to prove that our model isn't a relic of history. It's the single best way to revitalize the promise of our future.
And Yamiche, with that speech, President Biden is sending a clear message to the alliance that the last 4 years are done. The United States is back, wanting to assume its role as the leader of the free world, a bulwark of the Western alliance. Do you think, though, that message is being well received in Europe?
Well, it's a welcome message, but it's a message that is also coming as President Biden is trying to really do away with some of the damage that was caused over the last 4 years. He's trying to essentially say to our allies, the last 4 years were an anomaly. They were not reflective of American values. But let's be very clear, for a very long, long time, the United States will be known around the world as the country that elected President Trump. And the President Trump also, the former President Trump, also had 75 million people vote for him the second time around. So our allies are also looking at this, at our country and saying, what exactly is going on in America? So while President Biden, of course, is signaling that America wants to, again, embrace our allies, there's really a lot of damage that needs to be had there. And our allies, including Europe and other places, they've figured out how to function with an America that was weaker and that didn't want to be part of multilateral deals and multilateral agreements. So you also are entering back into the world stage with countries that are saying, we figured out how to talk about climate change, how we talk about the pandemic without America being part of a partner of that. And now this is really President Biden wanting to go back into the fray. I think there are, based on my reporting, there's a lot of people who welcome that idea, leaders who welcome that idea, but I think that it's still very early because America has that stain really, and that reputation now because President Trump went to these conferences, went to these gatherings, and really did damage there. Really did, in some ways, poke his finger in the eye of a lot of our allies.
And you know what, Renee? To Yamisha's point, I'm just wondering: is it too late now? Because the allies have figured out how to do things without American leadership. Now that America wants to exert its leadership again, I'm just wondering, is it too late for America to do that in the eyes of the rest of the world, even though they're our allies?
Well, you know, I think the main point of the speech today was supposed to be, you know, a warm glass of milk or, you know, the nightcap of your choice to help America's allies sleep a little more soundly at night. You know, it was the "this time I'll be sweeter" speech, right? But there is this idea, Joe Biden's job is to win back the trust of the allies. These last 4 years have been very, very difficult. And I think that's what his task is, to say, not just to say, okay, we're back, you guys stand over here, we're taking over again. Because as Yamiche said, they figured out how to do this without America. So Joe Biden has to kind of win them back over in a way that, hasn't had to be done before, because we haven't had the last 4 years that we've had. But I also think what was interesting in the speech that he gave was it was also a message to the American people that we're not just citizens of one nation, but we're citizens of the world. And that's why I think he made a point of mentioning the solemn promise of Article 5 of NATO. An attack on one is an attack on all. He's trying to sort of bring America back into the fold and to convince Americans that we're better off within these the alliances that were broken so badly in the last 4 years.
It's amazing that the speech that President Biden gave today, had we not been through the 4 years of President Trump, would have been a mundane speech, would have been a boring speech. But the mere fact that he mentioned that, America stands by Article 5 after 4 years of a president who refused to do that, that speech today by President Biden, as you said, was a warm glass of milk, or the after-dinner drink of your choice. Renee Graham and Yamiche Alcindor, thank you very much. Coming up, the wild winter weather has slowed vaccine distribution efforts across the country, but the White House is already working to make up for the loss. More after the break.